We hear you. If you thought we were going to leave Anne out of this, then you've got another thing coming. Besides Amphibia, The Owl House is another of Disney's best rated shows, and it's for a good reason. The show is funny and enjoyable on many levels, and even goes into the dramatic deep end on various occasions. In the past, we put Luz in Amphibia, and she did really well, all things considered. But the question is how Anne will handle being in the demon world. For Luz, she was put in a world where magic existed and was easier for someone like her to get a hold on, but doesn't mean that everyone uses it, which gave her a specific edge. But Anne will be different. Anne is sent to a world where magic is integral to fighting, and Anne herself does not really possess much capacity or interest in magic. Not enough to get really as far as Luz did, and Anne is more of a physical type fighter who uses martial arts, such as Muay Thai, to combat threats. So to say it'll be interesting to see how Anne would grow in this world would be an understatement. So without further ado, let's ask the question we all want to know. What if Anne went to the Boiling Isles? The story starts when Anne is convinced by her friends to steal an odd box. Anne isn't really a bad person or someone who does things like this all the time, but peer pressure and the need to be accepted by her friends causes her to open the box. They gather round to examine this box of calamities and she opens it. As soon as she does, there is a flash of light and Anne would open her eyes falling through the air, the Boiling Isles sitting right below her. Cue the theme song. Anne would fall out of the sky and land on a very particular stand. Standing over her, fuming that she ruined a few of her human knickknacks, Ida the Owl Lady. Anne would get off the ruined table and look around. A crowd had formed nearby, and as she had brought attention to the tiny stand, which, once reset with Anne's help, brought a bit more business to Ida's stall. Ida would start passing off the junk as odd objects, like a box that sees the deepest, darkest secrets of your soul. Yeah, it's a television. Anne would correct her and show her what they were and what they did. Turning on the television, this causes the people to go crazy trying to figure out how it works. And so the people begin a makeshift auction, each trying to outbid each other over it. Ida would then find Anne to be useful to her business, and considering that Anne has nowhere to go, she offers to let her stay at the Owl House for as long as she needs. Since Anne isn't really sure where she is or why she's here, she would take her up on it. Anne would be talking about trying to find a way to get home. Ida would offer her a way home in exchange for Anne helping Ida to get into the conformatorium, where they're holding King's crown. Anne, having no other choice, agrees and decides to help Ida. They break in, but they're confronted with Warden Wrath, who hopes to ask Ida out on a date. Ida refuses and a fight breaks out in which Anne frees the prisoners there, which helps them fight back. Given that Anne is a bit more versed in martial arts than Luz, almost to a comedic degree, they manage to defeat Warden Wrath. They then head back to the Owl House. Now, we have an issue here. Normally, this is the point where Luz realizes she can go home and decides not to, due to the fact that she would get to live out her fantasy of being a witch. But Anne has no such fantasy and more than likely would want to leave the Owl House and go home through the door. But that wouldn't be very entertaining on our end, so let's make a bit of a change here. They get back to the Owl House, but Ida refuses to make good on their agreement since technically Anne didn't help them get the crown back, and instead it was destroyed. She tells Anne that the crown was worth a lot of money, and that Anne will need to make that money back. Anne states that it's a Burger King crown made of cardboard, and Ida says that no matter what it's worth in the human world, in the demon realm it's worth millions. She forces Anne to help her sell her baubles to pay off her debt, and yes, I say that with finger quotes just in case you didn't see. The next day, Ida conscripts Anne to deliver potions to various customers. When Anne says she doesn't know where any of these places are since she's new to the Isles, Ida sends King with her. They would go through Bonesborough, coming into contact with all forms of life, none of which seemed to be too happy with the human. They would reach a castle belonging to the wizard Adagast. He would attempt to send her on a chosen one quest, but Anne is far too smart for that. She's not naive. She tells him, "No thanks, I'm just trying to get home." Adagast would ask her where her home is. He knows she's not from the Boiling Isles and would take an educated guess that it's the human world. She would look back and ask how he knew. Adagast would pull out an old flip phone. No reception, but it was capable of a dial tone as well as an old built-in monochrome version of the Snake game. He would tell her that Ida isn't the only person who can get in and out of the human world. Given how desperate she is to get home, Anne would finally bite and would pay for the information that Adagast was selling. She would go on the same sort of quest that Luz goes on, except she's far less interested in these strange people showing up to help her. But as it would turn out, it's a trap. Anne would actually do very well defending herself, but against a magic practitioner, Anne is easily knocked down. Ida would eventually appear to save her, however, and would both defeat and devour Adagast. Not gonna lie, she made it look so delicious. Ida would take Anne home. Later on, she would attempt to teach Anne some magic to defend herself. Nothing too big, just some combat blasts. She would display her ability to Anne, but Anne is having a hard time doing it. Anne would ask if it's even possible for a human to perform magic, and Ida would wonder about it. She doesn't suppose humans have a magic bile sac, so it stands to reason that Anne can't use magic because she lacks one. Anne would frustratedly go off to the forest, wondering when Ida would finally grow a conscience and let her go home. She wouldn't need magic combat training if they would just let her go home. Looks like greed exists in every dimension. It's there that she meets Willow, who is being picked on by one of her peers over her lack of ability in making an abomination. Anne would step in to drive Amity off. Amity would stand her ground and get into an insult match, which Amity would actually win. However, Amity still leaves, and Anne is left standing there with Willow. "I already don't like her," Anne would say. Willow would sigh and say, "Join the club." Anne would ask why she's being picked on, and Willow would say it's because she's dragging the class down for her inability to make an abomination. She would say that Amity's abominations are always top of the class, but that her own always fall flatter than a pancake. Anne would slowly come up with a nefarious plan. She will pose as an abomination specifically to help Willow get one over on Amity, and put the bully back in her place. Willow is slightly against the idea, but she allows Anne to help. They head to Hexside, where Anne poses as an abomination. Most of this episode actually goes the same. The next episode, however, shows something different. King is trying to teach Anne about demons. Anne seems a bit more interested in exploring, though it seems not too many normal places exist. At least in Amphibia, there were fun places to visit that seemed natural and Earth-like. In the demon realm, the water's all boiling, and all the people here want to eat humans. But this doesn't stop Anne from thinking that there are better places to be. It's at this point that Luz would hear about Ida's potions she drinks, but Anne isn't all that interested in drinking it, so more than likely she wouldn't do so. However, due to King's meddling, the potion is lost and Ida transforms anyway. Anne and King would run through the house and attempt to get away, but because Anne didn't take the image of Ida's spell circle, she doesn't know that light spells can be made by drawing a particular symbol on paper. Because of this, something different happens. Upon getting cornered by Ida's owl form with King, something in Anne snaps. Her eyes let off a faint blue glow, and she raises her hand and draws a circle in the air with her finger and shoots a blast of magic. This pushes the owl lady Ida back. She eventually gets into battle with the creature using this new ability to push her back. Eventually Ida would awaken and question Anne on what happened, and King would spill the beans and say that Anne can do magic. This is confusing to Ida, and Ida wonders if it's possible that Anne might be half witch. She's not, but this is Ida's guess. After this, Anne gets a little more interested in the stuff. Anne decides that she'd like to join Willow at Hexside in hopes of learning more about these magic powers. Ida would hate this idea, but would relent and allow her to go, since Ida is too lazy to really teach her herself. They would later go to a convention where Anne would look through all of the covens. Having studied a bit, Anne isn't sure what type of magic she can do or what she's good at. None of what she can do seems to match what the other covens can do. Anne can't make abominations or things. She seems to have some connection to nature and some strength, but that's where the similarities end. She finds the Emperor's coven and seems rather interested. The idea of the level of respect that she would get from joining such a coven brings her to Lilith, who's revealed to be Ida's sister. Lilith sugarcoats the whole situation and attempts to make things all sound like Ida's fault to play on the distrust Anne already has for her. Amity and Anne run into each other, and Amity asks what a human is doing at a magic convention when humans can't even do magic. Anne would show off her own power that she developed fighting Ida, and this catches everyone's eye, especially Lilith's. Amity thinks it's a trick and refuses to believe it, but Lilith begins to wonder. Most everything stays the same until Anne's first day at Hexside. Anne is allowed to enroll by Principal Bump. Anne doesn't know which track to study given that she isn't too sure about the nature of her magic. Bump forces her into the potions track. Anne, however, doesn't mind this like Luz does. Anne was never sure which track to join, and the potions track reminds her of cooking, which reminds her further of her parents who had a shop where Anne would often work. Despite this, she still wishes to learn more about her own powers, and Bump fails to allow her to study it, as joining and studying in multiple tracks is a taboo act. This doesn't stop Anne from taking her time to study it anyway. However, when she's caught doing that, she's put in the detention track, where she manages to find a group of students who prefer to mix magic and be more free than Hexside is willing to allow. Anne feels a bit at home here, as these troublemaking kids remind her of Sasha and Marcy to a point. Anne becomes slightly notorious within this group. However, an inspector shows up from the Emperor's Coven to decide how much of a budget increase or decrease that Hexside deserves. This is all a ruse though, as the inspector is a basilisk whose thing is to absorb magic. Most of Anne's friends would be defeated and have their magic absorbed. Even Anne tries to attack with her magic, but it is also absorbed. The basilisk would comment that it had never tasted a type of magic like this before. So pure, so powerful, of a calamitous nature. The basilisk desires more and targets Anne. Anne would not be weakened like the others were. Anne was born without magic, and it seems that whatever power she has is new, as her body still seems to function just as well without it. Anne would race off. She's very athletic, so staying one step ahead of the basilisk would not be quite as hard as it seems. Through the use of different secret passages that the school has access to, Anne would manage to lead the basilisk into a trap and defeat it, all of the magic squeezed out and returned to its original hosts. Anne is hailed as a hero alongside the other students who had helped them. Because of this, those students are allowed to mix magic and study multiple tracks, and Anne is allowed to study her own powers with the school's resources as she needs. Later, Amity accidentally burns up the memory images from Willow, which causes her to get amnesia. Anne gets super mad at Amity and says that she's going to help her fix this. Amity, despite wanting to keep their memories secret, decides to help. They go in and start putting memories back together, all while Anne is trying to learn more about Amity and Willow's relationship. Inner Willow shows up and starts trying to stop them and burn the images, but Anne decides to fight her. Of course, she does not know yet that this is Inner Willow and only sees it as a flaming monster, so she fights. But in this domain, the Inner Willow is in complete control. Despite her best efforts, Anne is defeated. Amity helps her escape, and Anne slowly puts things together. In the end, Amity and Willow patch things up. Later comes Grom, but Amity doesn't feel like doing it, and Anne doesn't even want to go. But Gus would convince her to go. Anne would go and decide to take Amity's place, but she doesn't know what it entails. She has to face Grom and her greatest fears. Those for Anne being her self-doubt as well as the fear of her friends leaving her because she isn't cool. And that is the form Grom takes, the form of Sasha and Marcy. Grom, through their voices, tells Anne that she's no fun, that she's a fuddy-duddy. They tell Anne that she doesn't have anything special about her and that she'll never make it home. But Ida, Willow, Gus, the kids from the detention track, and even Amity step in to tell Anne that she's fine. She's perfect as she is, and she doesn't need to pressure herself to be anything that she's not. She should be happy being Anne, and that she's cool no matter what anybody says about it. Together, they all defeat Grom. Anne then returns home, being crowned as Grom Queen. She would sit there and think about returning home, but instead of being scared about failing, she instead is filled with fire and faith that she will make it there. Anne would later hear that Ida's curse is worsening, and together with Gus and Willow, looks for something within the Emperor's castle. Lilith would find her and ask what they're doing. Anne would come clean and ask if Lilith can help her. Lilith says that Ida is scared of the Emperor's Coven, but that there's nothing to be scared about, and if she could get Ida to visit Emperor Belos, she's sure she could be cured. Anne asks about how this will occur, and Lilith says that Emperor Belos is connected to the Titan that makes up the Boiling Isles and gives it its power. She says that with that power, Belos can break any curse. Anne says she's not sure if Ida will go for it. Lilith says that she can help to capture her and bring her in. Anne asks if it's wrong to do this against Ida's will, but Lilith says that's okay because what they're doing will save Ida in the end. And so she tells Anne what to do. She gives her a sedative to put in Ida's glass of apple blood, which when Ida drinks it causes her to fall asleep. Together, Anne and Lilith take her to the Emperor's castle where they all get an audience with Emperor Belos. Belos commends Lilith for her work and introduces himself courteously to Anne and says he has heard much about her and her particular kind of magic. Anne would blush because of this, but wouldn't respond. Belos would then wake up Ida. He would offer to cure her curse if she agreed to join the Emperor's Coven, but when she refuses to, he decides to send her away to the Conformatorium to be petrified, much to Lilith and Anne's horror. Lilith complies and Anne attempts to battle. She gets utterly beaten by Belos, but due to the strain put on him from the battle, Belos would leave the room to regain control and absorb power from a palisman. Anne and Lilith escape from the castle, and Anne would accuse Lilith, but Lilith would say she didn't know. It's here that she would spill her heart to Anne, telling her how she had cursed Ida, and how she had made a mistake out of jealousy, how she wanted her sister to join the coven with her and be cured so they could both be powerful witches. Lilith exclaims that she's a bad sister, but can at least stop Ida from being petrified, and share the curse with her. Together they enter the Conformatorium, and Lilith tells Anne what Belos' plans for the portal are. She tells her that she needs to destroy the portal at all costs. Anne knows, however, that she can't do that. She needs to get home. As time passes, Anne would find Belos, and Lilith would save Ida and share the curse. This steals both of their abilities to use magic, but it at least makes the curse manageable. And with their staves, they manage to escape. Never sure how to say that one. Anne faces Belos. She attempts to get through the portal and destroy it from the other side, but Belos is too strong. Belos would use his incredible gifts of sorcery to deal with Anne and push her back. Belos claims that when he's finished with Anne, he'll find Lilith, Ida, King, Gus, Willow, Amity, and everyone she calls friends at Hexside and petrify them while making her watch. Anne refuses to let this come to pass. Her anger boils over as her eyes glow blue. She grits her teeth as bolts of blue lightning strike all around her. A blue aura forms around her and she lets out an explosion of energy. Her hair stands up and turns blue. With this, she manages to push Belos back. In the end, Anne has to destroy the door to make sure Belos can't use it. She would force Belos to flee and she would then pass out from the power. While she's passed out, Gus, Willow, and Amity would appear to rescue her and would take her back to the Owl House. Anne would wake up there with Ida and Lilith looking at her, asking her what it was she had done, and why she turned blue when fighting against Belos. Anne wouldn't have a definitive answer, but she would mention that she couldn't stand the idea of Belos turning those she loves into stone, and she just snapped. She would start to cry though, as she had to destroy the door and thus had no way to get home. Those within the Owl House would feel sorrowful as Anne exclaims that she can never see her family again. Ida would promise her though that she would not rest until she could find a way to get Anne home. Lilith also agrees and says she'll provide whatever she could learn about it from her time in the Emperor's Coven. The entire team would come together and embrace their hero Anne, and the season would come to an end. Yes, I know there is another season, one that seems close to finishing and perhaps wrapping up the storyline much like Amphibia did. However, I only covered season 1 of Amphibia and I'll do the same for the Owl House. If you enjoy these videos, please let us know if you'd like to see a second part to each of these stories. One way to show us how much you care for this is to give us a like and a comment. And of course, if you haven't subscribed, feel free to do so. It helps us out a lot. And if you haven't rang the bell yet, go ahead and ring it so you can know when we drop more content just like this. After all, if we do decide to do a second part to these videos, I'm sure you'll want to know about it, right? Right? Sure you do. Anyway, peace out my friends, and never forget, Frederator loves you.